city, but particularly this time coming in, I know you've got plenty of other things to do. It's a hard task. It's not necessarily a popular task, but it has to be done, and we all owe you a great debt of gratitude for taking on the task. As the governor said, mass transit is essential to our city. If it breaks down, so does our economy, so would our property values, and so would our quality of life. A safe and reliable mass transit system is also the key to realizing the greener, greater New York that we've envisioned in our Plan YC. And because the mass transit system is so intertwined with every aspect of city life, the fiscal crisis the MTA faces is something that we all do have a stake in solving. The problems that the Commission worked to address have been building, as Dick said, for many years. During the good times, the MTA borrowed more than it could afford and relied on a housing bubble to finance its spending. Now the real estate transaction tax revenues have dried up. That hurts the state, that hurts the city, but it also hurts the MTA and puts the MTA actually in the same position as millions of homeowners up to their ears in debt and needing assistance to stay afloat. But taxpayers and commuters should not be forced to bail out the authority without first winning reductions of the major fare increases and service cuts that the MTA has proposed, and winning funding reforms that will help prevent these crises from recurring again and again. If you remember, nearly 2 years ago, we proposed one such reform, a plan that would have generated substantial revenue for the MTA. The governor and I strongly supported it, but we couldn't pass it through the state legislature. The legislature at that time stated that they could find other solutions to the MTA's long-standing fiscal imbalances, and I'm pleased to say today that the Ravitch Commission is offering them more information and options, but it really is up to them to come up with solutions. After all, this is a democracy and everybody has a right to be heard, and the legislature has to come up with something that does the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people, even if everybody isn't happy with their solution. Our administration stands ready to assist the state in implementing these solutions. As you know, the city does not have control over the MTA, but we do have 4 appointees on the board, and we are going to make sure that our voices are heard, and we're going to work hard to achieve a real solution, one that's fair to city commuters and fair to taxpayers, and solves the problem long term. There will be no quick fixes. There will be no painless solutions. People should come to understand that. But I do think that if everybody comes to the table, we can lessen the major fare hikes and service reductions currently being considered by the MTA, and we can adopt funding reforms that will allow us to avoid going through this again at next year and the year after and the year after that. Now is the time to begin making the hard decisions. It's not a good time to make hard decisions about the MTA. The state's going to have its problems, and the city, as you know, certainly does have its problems, as well does the country and the world. But we can't afford to kick these problems down the road any longer. To solve them, we will need every elected official to be part of the solution. That's what governing is all about, and that's what leadership is all about. So once again, I'd like to thank the governor for his leadership and the commission members for their hard work, especially Dick Ravitch. Dick led the MTA through a crisis in the 1970s, and we appreciate his lending his knowledge and expertise to find solutions to the crisis that the authority finds itself in today. Thank you very much.
If there are any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
I'll pick a name and news outlet, and just so you know, Chairman Ravitch is going to be saying detailed questions. If you have technical questions about the report, you can say Adam Lisbert from the Daily News. If the MTA is going to take over the East River and Harlem River bridges from the city, what should the city get in return from them, and do you think the city council would ever agree to it?
Well, this is, I think, inevitably something that the state would endeavor to, but the city also has budgetary issues and resources, and that's negotiation. We'll work that out.
I think the governor just answered it as well as I could. Just vote him, repeat and vote, with both names after. Seriously, guys, the bridges are an asset of the city. As you know, we have invested an enormous amount of money over the last years to make sure that our bridges are not substandard. I don't think there is any substandard bridge in the city, certainly no city bridge. If you just go along the Harlem River, you'll see the trains and keep replacing span after span. We keep painting and repairing and improving and lightening the deck and making all of the investments in better bridges so that they're safe and that they don't cost us more down the road. In the 70s, they walked away from maintenance, and we're paying for that now, but we are not walking away from maintenance. Maintenance is a very substantial expense of the city, and anything that's done with bridges or anything else, we have to take a look at all of the different expenses. It's not quite so simple. There are expenses and there are values. And, all of these assets of the city, the one thing we've got to make sure we don't do in this world is take our capital assets and sell them to the private sector in return for money that we use for operating expenses. That's not good fiscal policy.
Let me just add one thing to this, and that is that obviously the discussions about how to accomplish these goals are going to continue, and in the best sense, as the governor said, there's going to be draft legislation, there'll be a lot of discussion. But if the ultimate outcome of all these deliberations are that the MTA is going to generate revenue from those bridges, then clearly it is going to relieve, and this report makes it abundantly clear, it's going to relieve the city of the obligations of maintaining them, because the MTA would have to absorb that cost under all circumstances. So nobody's asking the city to give something up for nothing.
Stan Brooks of 1010 Wins. Who has to approve the tolling of the bridges and the payroll tax?
As far as the payroll tax is concerned, it would be a tax imposed region-wide and would have to be imposed by the legislature. As to the question of tolling the bridges, that is very complicated legally. It is currently being studied. There are federal issues as well as city and state issues involved, and that's part of what will be discussed as legislation gets drafted and discussions begin with the leadership of the legislature.
So there's a back to the